Okay, so on behalf of IACD, I'd like just to welcome all of you here today. My name's Anna Clark and I'm one of the trustees on the board of IACD and one of IACD's European trustees. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope wherever you are, you're having a good day or evening, as the case may be. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our guest contributors today, Pradeep Narayanan from the Praxis Institute for Participatory Practices in India, and colleague Tarini Shapurkar as well, who we're very delighted to have and look forward to hearing from. And I'd also like to thank Professor Sarah Banks from Durham University in England, who has been instrumental in coordinating the Researcher Forum meetings, along with Dr. Ciara Bradley from Maynooth University in Ireland, who's also with us today. And without any further ado, hand over to Sarah, who's going to chair this forum with us today. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Well, it's a pleasure to have Pradeep and Tarini here with us today, and to have you, who I suspect I can see are from different parts of the world, which is always one of the huge benefits of these IACD fora. So I think we've got too many people probably to ask you each to verbally introduce yourselves, but if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, just saying who you are and which country or institution you're from, and maybe what your research interests are, or what interests you about the decolonising theme, and then we can get to know each other a little bit. And after Pradeep and Tarini have given their presentation, we'll take some comments, questions, reflections, and I'll invite the people who speak then to introduce themselves, because one of the purposes of this forum is to get to know other people around the world with some similar research interests. And we never know, just from those little pictures on the screen, who people are and what interesting things might lurk behind that video camera. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Pradeep and Tarini. I've known Pradeep now for quite a few years, and I'm very impressed with the work of Praxis in India. Pradeep does very challenging and important work alongside a number of community partners and people from different parts of India and different partner organisations, often working with marginalised groups who may be left out, not just left out of policy, but left out of research. And also Pradeep is very willing and able to challenge those of us from academia in the global north in terms of some of the practices that may be colonising, often when we don't recognise it ourselves. And he does a lot of work on participatory practices and has a lot of very important and interesting theories, methods and ideas. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you today, and Tarini, to hear your perspectives. I think you also have some important and interesting challenges to put to us, and some ideas to share with the group. So I'll ask you now to share your screen, and I think Tarini and Pradeep will speak for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion, reflections and so on. So over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you IACD as well, and Sarah, as she said, that we have been knowing each other for many years now, and I've learned quite a lot with this partnership with Sarah and her team in Durham University. And just to give a very brief introduction, Praxis Institute for Participatory Practices is a 28-year-old organization which has been working on participatory methods and approaches with the aim of with social equity as an important part of its agenda. And it started with tools as a PRA tools as an important thing, and later on equity became its primary agenda. And last I think, 7 to 8 years, our focus also has been on decolonizing various aspects of research and evaluation. And for last few years, we also are anchoring something called Sindanai. Sindanai in Tamil language means critical reflection. And the primary aim is to mainstream research as a critical research, critical thinking function. And with this, we also have experience of working with few organizations like Ford Foundation to look at landscape of evaluations and research. And some of these areas have been quite a big learning for us. And again, this is another opportunity for us to bring some of the learnings which we have to engage with you and do a collective reflection together. And with this, I'll just start. For us, as you know, praxis is a word which is evolved from Paulo Freire's, the of conscientization, and with Paulo Freire as an important person with whose work has inspired us quite a lot. And this journey is something inspired by some of the anti-colonial literatures, and which includes people like Ambedkar to Frantz Fanon and Periyar and bell hooks. And this year also happens to be 100th year anniversary of Frantz Fanon, and which will be like next month. And it has always been his ideas have continued to challenge, disturb, and inspire us. But as we reflect on his legacy, it is important to say that to understand decolonization, we also need to understand colonization. And here, when we say decolonizing aspect, it is not about decolonizing researchers, but it is about decolonizing research as a system, and even the research which is produced is decolonized. So in that sense, the journey has to be mapped in that way. And Fanon has asked us to imagine a new kind of human on both sides of colonial divide, and a call not just for a shift in, it's not like behavior or attitude shift, which he talks about, but it is of fundamentally a new human person to understand decolonization. So it is there we are trying to find out how to transform the very foundation of how knowledge is conceived, conducted, and communicated. So when we are reflecting on what it means to decolonize research, there has always been a debate about the use of the word, whether we should use the word decolonize or anti-colonial. For me, somewhere the word decolonize has a very significant meaning, because it helps us to acknowledge certain aspects of it, right? So firstly, I would say it begins with the decolonization, the word, it begins with the acknowledgement and recognition that colonized forms of research continues to exist. I think this is the primary assumption for any decolonization journey has to be there, that one, we need to acknowledge that the current the colonized forms of research exist even today. They are not relics of the past. They are very much alive in the present structure of knowledge creation, academia, or in the way we define evidence, or in what way we consider valid knowledge. So much of our research infrastructure was built during or in service of the colonial rule, and we believe that decolonization is equally important to challenge those, to go through that journey, reflecting on that journey. Second most important thing for us is that decolonization as a term implies that the onus is on the colonizer, right? And why we do look at marginalized communities to take on the labor of resisting, of educating, of transforming. But in this case, decolonization must be driven by those who hold power and are by the institutions, researchers, funders, and systems that have inherited or benefit from colonial structure. So it is the colonizer, whether an individual, an institution, or a system, that must do the work of decolonizing itself. So this involves rethinking the worldview. So this is a second thing which needs to be acknowledged in the decolonization. And the third is also very important, that we often think and frame decolonization in terms of empowering the oppressed. But Fanon's work reminds us that decolonization is not fundamentally about being oppressed. It is about the oppression. So in that case, it is also about disempowerment, especially the disempowerment of the colonizer, who receives privileges from the colonization, although may not want it or may not even be aware of it. It involves deliberate dismantling of those privileges by dismantling structures of dominance. This is why decolonization can never be a comfortable process. It is unsettling. It takes away power. It challenges that was previously considered neutral or universal. And that's why, as Fanon said, that decolonization never takes place unnoticed, or it influences individuals and modifies them fundamentally. One doesn't have to even explain that how my work is decolonized, because it will be very clearly noticed. So that is where all the three aspects are very important when we try to understand the research part of it, because the old normal is challenged, and what is taken for granted as legitimacy of the dominant positions begin to erode, and that's when the shift begins. And again, to go back to Fanon's word we need a new person or a new species. We need new people in research for whom lived experience is not an exception of a diverse asset, but a qualification in its own right. So therefore, I would say we wanted to set this introduction to define how we mean by decolonization. And then I'll just hand over to Tarini to take the next few slides. Yeah.
Right. So just following from what Pradeep said, we do recognize that a lot of work is already happening in this journey that Pradeep mentioned. So in order to really look at these journeys, what we're trying to do is actually dig a little deeper. And for this, we've used a new analogy that I'd like to just take you through. So here we're just thinking about whose reality counts and how do you really mainstream this idea. So imagine a feeding tube, a structure that connects two bodies. So in this case, the tube runs from the global north or the global minority to the global majority or the global south. Of course, here we don't mean these terms strictly geographically. Rather, we're using these terms as a shorthand for power, where the global north represents historically dominant institutions, systems, and knowledge producers. And the global south represents those who have been positioned often as recipients or beneficiaries in our studies. So in this analogy, the feeding tube we see as representing the flow of knowledge. And for much of modern research history, this flow has been largely one way or unidirectional. But things are changing, and many of these shifts, which they may not be transformative on their own, but represent a lot of meaningful progress. So if we think of the first shift, that is in what is being fed through the tube. So the shift in content. Traditionally, knowledge flowing through the system was produced and validated by institutions in the global north. But today we're seeing increasing efforts to diversify what goes into that system. So for example, participatory research itself, since around the 1970s with people like Robert Chambers and many others, were early attempts to ask whose reality really counts. So this helped getting voices of those that are often left out in research. And in recent years, more Southern authored evidences, community-generated data, and indigenous knowledge systems are being taken more seriously, with curricula also being updated to include Global South perspective. So this is one of the shifts that we see already happening. The second shift that we see is in the tube itself. So that is in methodologies and processes through which this knowledge is produced and interpreted. So there's growing awareness that it is not just about collection of data, but about how that data is analyzed. So for example, the shift from purely quantitative to now more mixed method approaches, and that they're being adapted to include more narratives and story-based formats. Outcome harvesting, for example, since several years now, is being used to capture non-linear change, particularly in complex social interventions. So interdisciplinary understanding and these changes improving the quality of insights and bringing research closer to lived realities were the second change that we could map. The third in this analogy that we are talking about is the shift in who's administering the tube, sorry. So who plays the role of the nurse, so to speak? This is about who counts those who are counted. Increasingly, research teams are recognizing the importance of diverse perspectives in interpretation. So this is where the debate of mainstreaming lived experience started in, I think, around the early 2000s. We are seeing Global South partners included not just as data collectors or translators, but as principal investigators and authors. In some consortia, local researchers are leading research agendas, asking the questions and shaping the analysis. Initiatives like co-creation workshops, participatory evaluations are embedding more of these ideas into the research. And these shifts help us get closer to the truth, not just a single truth, but a truth that is grounded in context and relational knowledge. Because this feeding tube metaphor still implies a caregiver-patient relationship with the global north as a doctor or an expert administrating treatment to the south, and the south is still imagined as the one that is in help or that is in need of development, of help, of capacity building. But what if the south is not the patient? What if, in fact, the south is the one feeding the north? So this is when we see that it's important to shift our gaze to the global south. We recognize that it's not just a focus on the root cause, but a focus on why exactly we have the feeding tube to begin with. So to understand this a little better and a little deeper, we use another analogy, that of chess. So what we recognize that in the system that we were describing, we are trying to empower others, but not trying to disempower ourselves. We're all working towards a kind of win-win situation, but this is where we wanted to problematize the situation. At this point, if you can see the screen, we're referring to the analogy of thinking about chess as a game and chess as a way of recognizing systems and structures. So here, if each piece can be imagined as an institution, the different rules that each piece has to follow are the different rules that those institutions often follow. And all of this, every move, every strategy takes place on the board. So the board in this case symbolizes the underlying structure, the worldview, the historical power dynamics, the epistemologies, and assumptions that are often taken as universal. And so the question is, where do we really want to bring the change? Is it just the moves in individual institutions, or do we want to reshape the board itself? So from this vantage point, if we go back to the feeding tube, if we see this from the global south gaze, it's often racism, casteism, patriarchy, ableism, and other systems of oppression that are embedded in our global knowledge and power structures that are actually the disease. This is not confined to the global south. These are global in origin and global in impact, though they manifest differently across different contexts. The global south recognizes that these illnesses are not accidental. They are produced and perpetuated by a geopolitical system that privileges the north and normalizes hierarchies. So this is precisely also where we aim to position our work. For example, we are involved in supporting the development of community-led ethical review boards. These are alternative spaces of decision-making that challenge the authority of traditional ethical committees. Most of these that are embedded in elite institutions and are rarely accountable to the communities that are actually being researched. So the community-led boards are our attempt to dig deeper and to actually target the board of the chess board. These community-led boards don't just ask whether research follows procedure. They ask whether it aligns with the community's values, their lived experiences, and the collective well-being. This is not about moving a new piece on the board. This is about changing how the game is governed itself. Because until we challenge the board, the structural realities of racism, casteism, patriarchy, and other forms of exclusion, we will continue playing the same game. We may occasionally change players or switch colors, but the terms of the game remain the same. And if we fail to recognize this, we risk mistaking reform for transformation. Ambedkar, and here we go back to a lot of the authors, theorizers that Pradeep mentioned. Ambedkar also referred to this as the infection of imitation, where those on the margins begin to aspire not to dismantle the system, but to succeed within it. So, for instance, if the black pawn is dreaming about being the white queen, Paulo Freire also called this the failure of conscientization, when communities internalize oppression and aim to replicate the logic of power rather than questioning the board itself. So bell hooks also reminds us of how most ideologies train us to only see one board, but we recognize that race, caste, class, gender, all of these are interlocked systems forming a nexus of domination. So movement against caste, for instance, may still rely on patriarchy to gain ground. So it's that recognition of this interlocking that is necessary, as bell hooks reminds us. So these thinkers shared what we might call an anti-colonial gaze, a way of looking not just at symptoms, but at the deeper illness. And that illness is not located within communities. It lies in the global structure of domination, where all these isms that I just mentioned are reinforced by knowledge systems, political economies, and institutional norms that operate across continents. I'll hand over to Pradeep.
Yeah. So primarily for us, some of these are something which we have been learning together with many organizations, many partners, and we also realize that that it is while we use the word systemic change and structural transformation, structural change, this is the kind of a purpose. The research, the research has actually helped in systemic change and structural transformation, but we would have realized that, like, for example, structural adjustment program, which happened in the global south, or stabilization program, there has been a lot of structural change which has happened. And those structural change are literally about mainstreaming or promoting one particular ideology which is in global north and changing the structure in the global south. So we have to realize that what we see as a dream that we need to do a systemic shift or a structural change, often many of our research has actually helped in promoting this structural change and structural transformation. So therefore, what is needed is to look at how the research itself, whether there is any systemic shift or structural change has happened in the research itself, right? That is important for us. Otherwise, research will become an instrument for colonization or a continued colonization. So therefore, for us, what is important is to how do we shift power within research. And here, if I look at it, I think for us, when we look at our own research, our own way of looking at it, we go through these stages of 8 stages of looking at a research as whether the research as a system acknowledges that the colonization exists. Often many of the research are very neutral to this term of colonization or dominance. So that's the first step of it. And the second step is whether there is an acknowledgement that privileges need to be dismantled is another important thing. And the third one is it is going to be painful. It is not going to be a win-win game. If you want to decolonize research, it is not going to be easily a win-win game. So therefore, it is important to understand how the disempowerment of certain dominance section happens and to work on it. So that is the third one, which we look at it in our research. And the fourth one is about whose voice counts, whose reality counts. And for that, we need to do in participatory methods, because otherwise the system may only look at the peripheries within the margins and not necessarily going deeper into the margins. And also the information is collected there have been a number of examples in our own studies where we have seen that a very survey type of questions, by the time we reach the 10th or 11th questions in our surveys, the respondent often feels that what the respondent has answered in the second or third question one tries to change it, but the system does not allow them to change the thing. Whereas in a participatory methods, often what happens is you are allowed to change your opinion even during the research itself. In that sense, it's an adoption of participatory method is also an acknowledgement that the research is an intervention. There is a purpose to do research, and somewhere it falls within the Paulo Freire's thing about conscientization. You may have to do dialoguing with the respondent to take them to a level. So that is an important feature of a decolonization. Otherwise, you will get your response according to the colonized mindset. To understand the colony, you need to do a dialoguing. That is what we call it as Sindhanai. A critical reflection is needed. Then the fifth one is the methodology, where it is about breaking academic barriers. The various disciplines are created at some point of time with an ingredients from colonialism. Therefore, interdisciplinary has been acknowledged as an important thing. But it is also to understand interdisciplinary does not mean all the disciplines coming together and working together. Interdisciplinary is also means it should be a non-disciplinary in that sense, that it has to break the barriers in that way. But often we tend to get a win-win game. So we bring every discipline together, and it is all systems become multifold exploitative. So in order to look at interdisciplinary, what Franz says of fundamentally different species or different man is about the need for a non-disciplinary study. And then the sixth one is about the mainstreaming lived experience. And this is where today's current thing about DEI or what is happening in the most dominant country in the world is about the challenge to the mainstreaming lived experience. And it is important to see that there is a panic, and that panic is the good part of decolonization, that you have a thing. So that is one important ingredient when we look at the decolonize, whether your decolonized research is mainstreaming lived experience, and by mainstreaming, it also disempowering certain identities. And the seventh one is, I think somewhere we studied Mama Cash, their principles, and it was very interesting to see how they look at the movement building's action and the movement building as a collectivization. And the third one, which is very important, the grant making to the movements. So in that sense, it's a three-pillar part of it. So any research also has these three elements of it: the purpose of the research or the objective of the research, and the second is the research itself, and the third is who funds the research. So all the three things are part of the system. You cannot decolonize only one part of it and not do the other part of it. So it is important to look at the key decision-making areas within the research in terms of decolonization. And I think all these seven things can happen, but I think where the biggest challenge will be on the theorization part of it. There are increasingly a number of global North academies also, or even in global South, the Brahmanical academies or the dominant sections academia is still look at they might actually do all the 6-7 things to get information from it. But it often looks at theorization as a divine mandate for this thing, and everything else can be done on the ground, but the theorization has to be done at one particular dominant level. So therefore, this function of theorization has to be decolonized, has to be brought into the thing. And that's where the issues of dismantling many institutions comes into the picture. Otherwise, even most of the participatory methods will remain as extractive if the space for theorization is not given to the margins. And that's where I feel a lot of challenge will happen. So when we look at all the 8 things in our own research, and we know that even in 28 years, a lot of research within the global South itself, are we able to decolonize our research? I won't say that we have been successful to that to any extent, because of this fact about how to bring a best of the ingredient together to decolonize some of our research. And I feel somewhere we fail miserably at the theorization level. And that's where, in the last 2-3 years, we have been trying to build the community researchers community evaluators, and also engaging with number of academic journals to give space for the writings done by the community, not through the norms which are already set in the mainstream, but also to be more flexible with the norms and allow these things to happen. I'll stop here to have further discussion. But again, once again, thank you for this opportunity. And, we will also share some of the materials here. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Tarini and Pradeep. So we'll give a round of applause, virtual applause or real applause. I think you certainly didn't disappoint us in terms of presenting the challenge. And you've usefully analysed the challenges that we face, which gives us some ideas about how we need to proceed. As a community of practitioners, I notice from all the comments in the chat, we have a range of people here, don't we, from different countries and backgrounds in the global south and the global north. So I think hopefully there's quite a few people who can put their minds to the seemingly very intractable but problems that we shouldn't see as impossible to challenge at the present time. So I was very, very struck by your last point about theorization, because as you say, that's really the most difficult point, and the importance of opening up academic journals to take different perspectives and theorizing from the ground up in a way, building on, I guess you are building on the theories of some of the key writers, Fanon, Ferreira, who are respected and known in academia, but taking them forward and actually getting that kind of living theory that can make sense to community partners, community researchers, as well as the people who read the academic journals as well. But your presentations were very, very rich with a lot of interesting ideas in there. So I shall now open up for discussion. And if you're able to find the hand to put up, please put up the hand. If not, wave at me. I can't see everybody on this screen, but hopefully Anna, Jessica, Kira will alert me if they see people waving or wanting to speak. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and not at great length, but just locating yourself from where in the world you are and what work you do, and then either offering a question or a reflection to Pradeep and Tarini. So anybody got some initial thoughts they'd like to share? Well, maybe while we're collecting our ideas, because I think there's a lot of food for thought in what you presented to us, I'll start off with the work that you're doing in Praxis, and I think you offer a very unique perspective, because for a long time you've been doing work on the ground, and I think your community-based research ethics boards are a really good example of trying to transfer some of the power from the structures that have been normalized in India, in your case, which have come from the global north in terms of vetting research, from those in universities to the people on the ground. And I think that was a great initiative, and it's an example of a lot of the different sorts of work you've done. But as I mentioned, the last point you made about theorization is perhaps even more challenging, and that's work that you're now taking forward and trying to develop, I guess, a theory of how we can do research, and how we need participatory research and the participatory paradigm. But that paradigm actually is quite a radical one. You talked about the need for a new human being, a new person, a new worldview. Involves people like me in the global north being able to give up some of my presuppositions, ideas, and to take on board a different way of being and thinking about the world. And I wonder if you could elaborate for us, you and Tarini, as to how you're able to do this very difficult work actually in the groups that you work with in Praxis, with some of the community partners and the staff in Praxis, and some of the challenges that you're facing along the way.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think on 9th and 10th of July, we are organizing one community-led ethical review board for one of the research protocol, which we are developing. So it's a very interesting time and interesting question. And we have been working together, and Sarah, with learning from you as well. So the idea for us, ethics is something which we feel as one of the last frontiers where participation has not percolated, because we have been doing participatory data collection, participatory even questionnaire development or participatory analysis, and even the joint papers, audit things and all are happening. But ethics has been a domain where we found that it is very difficult for even to build community participation in it, because ethics often sits on the minds of the people who are submitting the proposal. So ethics is like an invisible thing. So often people, more than the community, more than the IRBs, IRBs judging the ethics of the research protocol, it is the persons who prepare research proposal judges the protocol much more rigorously on behalf of the IRBs, because they want it to be approved. So it sits on the minds of the researchers in the very beginning. And that is the crucial thing about colonization, because colonization is often not something which will be visible outside. It will be something which will be visible within our own work of the way we do research. So it is very difficult to point out. So in this scenario, we found there are many things, many questions. So we brought the people with lived experience, or the people for whom the research is, to be brought together and to define ethics for themselves. And we have organized a number of ethical review board meetings from the community participation. And in most cases, it has been often very difficult to come with any consensus. Often it is a forced consensus, because there is a huge disagreement between the group from the time of what should be the compensation for a respondent to a kind of questions which is asked, whether it is going to harm in a short run or in a long run the person, and the solutions. And it always troubles us that many of the IRBs probably don't even discuss for more than an hour, or whatever is a luxury, to pass some of the the proposal and with a full recommendation. So this concept of doing a community-led ethical review board in a perfect way has been the big challenge, because whether IRBs are perfect or not, nobody is going to ask any questions. But if we have to mainstream something like community-led ethical review board, a number of questions will be asked in terms of how did you choose your community board members. This question is never asked for IRB members, right? How they are chosen, what ideology they have, what kind of qualifications they have, or how do they discuss in 2 hours, what is the protocol, did they know about. So that's where I feel that theorizing is a challenge, because every time when you want to theorize a community-led ethical review board from a community lens, you imagine so many questions are getting asked that you end up answering a lot of these questions. And finally, you will see somebody from a very dominant thing writing a paper which will talk about all these things, and none of these issues will get addressed. But if this comes from a non-dominant sections, even in the journals, you will get a number of questions like this, because your location matters, your positionality matters in terms of which is seen as the right knowledge. So therefore, often we are engaging with how a good research can be done, but we do not even engage on how a good research ecosystem should be, right? And it is there we find ethics as a very good entry point of especially the ethical review process, boards and all. There's a lot of things written on it, and And I don't think we have been able to publish it for very reason that so many questions get asked by ourselves to us, that we feel that it is not good enough to get published, right? So these are the areas which often sits on internally on the minds of the researchers from the global south, that there's a fear of being judged, the fear of being asked so many questions, and fear of how to. So I might be saying it, exaggerating some of these things, but I think it is also about lack of words to inform this kind of debates. I'll ask Tarini to add. Yeah.
No, I think I don't have much to add. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that point about the words, the language, that this whole concept of what counts as ethics, let alone what counts as a review board, is one that comes from another part of the world. And so when, as you say, when you're presenting it, how do you present it? You're going to be criticized from a different standpoint. And that leads me to looking at what we've got in the chat from MB Shitu, who congratulates you on your presentation, and also talks about colonisation being strengthened by the process of the validation of what constitutes new contributions to knowledge, tools for determining plagiarism, styles of referencing, which obviously relates to journals. I wonder whether MB Shitu is able to put the microphone and would like to elaborate on that comment before we take Francis, who's also got the hand up. Maybe not, but it's a very, very important point. And I see Lisa's written something, but let's take Francis. Would you like to put on your microphone and raise a question or make a comment?
Thank you. Am I audible?
You are, yes.
Okay, thank you. I would like first to make maybe a comment, then I will raise a number of questions to the presenter. And I'll go straight. So I'm Francis Gugi. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. I work with community-based organizations in my home county. From my experience working with grassroots community in Kiambu County, Kenya, I have come to believe that decolonizing research is not only about method, but about mindset. So too often, even well-intentioned participatory research becomes performative. So communities are consulted, but only truly empowered, and data is extracted without their reciprocal value. So in my local context, many community-based organizations hold rich indigenous knowledge systems, especially like in farming, social cohesion, informal saving groups, but these are rarely recognized as varied knowledge in mainstream academic or development spaces. So decolonizing research requires us to validate and elevate these community-led insights as equal and legitimate sources of knowledge. Additionally, I believe language is a key site of power. So when we conduct research in English or other non-local language, we often miss the depth of meaning and cultural nuance. Real decolonial must support the use of local language, idioms, and storytelling formats that communities understand and trust. So another critical aspect is ownership of knowledge. Communities should be co-owners of the research agenda, the process, the outcomes, and ideally, the solutions should be derived from them. So this demands humility from researchers and institutions, especially from the global north, and a willingness to let go of the role of expert. So finally, as a young African researcher, I'm also learning to decolonize myself, to unlearn the frameworks I was taught and listen more deeply to the people I serve. So true participatory is about power sharing. And I believe this is where our collective works began. From the presentation, I captured 4 areas I would like maybe clarification. I have 4 questions. On the power and participation, you have emphasized that participatory research does not automatically lead to decolonization. So in your experience, what are some subtle ways power imbalances still show up even in community-led research processes? And how can we dismantle them practically? 2, on a knowledge system, the colonial research challenges global north dominance in knowledge production. How do we, as researchers from the global south, assert and legitimize indigenous and community-based knowledge system within global academic spaces that strictly largely favor Western epistemologies? Then my third question is on language and accessibility. Language often reproduce colonial hierarchies. How can we intentionally integrate local languages and cultural expressions into research methodologies without losing academic rigor, especially when publishing or presenting in international contexts? And lastly, on institutional barriers, many of us operate within institutions or funding structures that still privilege colonial outfits. So from ethics boards to donor expectation, what strategy have you used to resist or navigate these systematic constraints while staying true to the colonial principles? Thank you.
Well, a lot for you to answer there, Tarini and Pradeep. Would you like to have a go at that? And if you can answer that, you can solve a lot of our challenges, I think, in one go. So over to you. Thank you, Francis. That was very, very challenging and insightful comments. Who would like to start? Pradeep.
Yeah, I'll start and then I think absolutely. I think I totally thank you for such a nicely articulated questions, which is literally an academic paper in terms of raising a set of these questions, because I think as Sarah also said that we have also been trying to at this stage problematize many things which are called as decolonizing, to say that a lot of the decolonizing which we are doing probably is not decolonizing yet. So it is, so therefore that also comes in the participatory approaches also. At many point of time, if we are participatory in our studies, a number of studies which we do, but at the end, if the research itself is an instrument of a particular ideology or particular mainstream thing, and we make our research very participatory in collecting certain information, and while collecting the information, we are not doing what Paulo Freire said in terms of conscientizing the colony. So literally all the evidences are same byproducts of the colonization, and we are making very participatory. In that way, every information comes into the system, and they are all being used and negotiated, or they are used in evolving a policy, which probably are an instrument of certain dominant thing. So this we have happened in voucher system, promotion of education vouchers, or promotion of health vouchers, insurance schemes, which all are an examples where participatory research have been done to, or so-called participatory research have been done to promote some of the voucher systems or the education system, which actually ends up dismantling the public education system or a public health system, which at the end were the foundation of the Global South's development paradigm. So in that sense, I would say a number of researchers have been used in different ways. But again, can we call them as a participatory research or not? Is a question which we all struggle with. Like, what is participatory? It has to be transformative. It has to be decolonized. So therefore, those debates will always happen. And with respect to the second, third, and fourth question, these are some of the systemic challenges from the knowledge, language, as well as the how to reach out to the. That's why for me, the reading of some of the work of Mama Cash has been quite useful to understand that how do you want to look at the creating a feminist movement would require you to educating the donors, or rather not just educating, it is taking the mantle of taking the thing of grant making and usurping it and building that entire thing. So therefore, those are all power struggles which we are engaging with on a constant basis. I'm sorry, I don't have answers to a number of questions, but I completely agree with those questions, and we can be the co-strugglers in that.
Yeah, I also completely agree. I have no answers, just maybe more reflections. And I completely agree. I loved all the questions. They really hit home in terms of everything we've been thinking about for the last few years over this research. And I think one of the things about most of the research that happens, and often the voices that get missed out, and this is something also related to the work of Sindhanai that Pradeep had mentioned, where we're trying to think critically. The idea that articulated voices of the community often get missed out, even in research. So it's often the social movements or those that are articulating the challenges of the community really well, often are sidelined, often purposely, to not bring out those issues or those get too deep rooted. And that's also linked to some of the work that we're doing through Sindhanai, where we're trying to rethink, and this links to your second question again, about how do we really look at language, how do we look at asserting ourselves. I think it's a lot of the frameworks that already exist in research. I think it's time to really relook at those, reimagine those. And that process of reimagination should be done in an ideally decolonized way, whatever that might mean at this stage. So I think reimagining a lot of those frameworks is where a lot of this will begin, because I think even just the idea of academic rigor, what exactly do we mean by academic rigor, would then become something that's more that we need to think about. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those answers. I'm aware that Gail's got the hand up, and I can also see in the chat we have comments from Lisa, Daniel, and Barbara. And so I'll just see if Lisa wants to add anything to what was put in the chat. Are you there, Lisa? And would you like to comment? You've just been at a meeting in the UK about the Research Excellence Framework. Would you like to add anything?
I will, thank you. Just as I've been listening, I just thought, in a way, what I've described there is the chessboard from the presentation in terms of the structures. So in terms of solutions, like the questions that were asked about how we make changes, it would be at a quite a high level there to make those kind of changes, to measure different kind of impacts, which would encourage universities to then be changing what they're doing. How that happens, I don't know. I think it would involve quite a lot of work over a period of time, but it's very important.
Thank you, Lisa. And we note that John Cornwell has put some useful references to decolonising our minds, so we can click on that link there. Do you want to say anything more about that, John, and why you find it useful?
Not really, no. I always look at things from a non-academic perspective, so that's how we try and do our stuff on the blog. So maybe some of that what's there can help break this down a bit. For those
Excellent.
of us who are not so technically minded as others.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So I'm sure people can link in there. Gail, would you like to put your microphone on and ask a question or make a comment?
I'll put the camera on, yes. No, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Gail. I'm based in Scotland, but I think a lot of my academic work has developed out of practice after from 30 years of working in development in Nepal. I promote a transformative learning practice, which is drawing very much from Jack Mesereau's work, which leans heavily on Freire's work. And I think it's really important. I came into it really feeling very disconnected in the Nepal context of the disconnect between the North and the South. So I think the discussion and the presentation today, I have greatly appreciated. But I was really sort of drawn at the beginning to the whole notion of the new human. And thinking about that, because in my own work, it seems that in the neoliberal world in which the North and the South and every corner of the world is operating within, that we are actually in a very dehumanized environment. And as part of my transformative learning practice, it's very much about promoting the space for the human. And I wonder where the notion of the new human fits into sort of basically our humanizing of practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Pradeep and Tarini, would you like to respond to that?
I think I just agree with it, and that has been our point also of especially the fact that it's about the new human, and it is also about how the ideology is so dominant of neoliberalism, where the aspect of any individual-based transactions are mainstreamed. Anything about collective is often not seen as a thing. So we want communities' voices. We want voices from the margins till they start articulating. Once the voices from the margins starts articulating, and especially if it is collectivized, then we dismiss them as a vested interest, and we do not give cognizance to that. So often in our research, we want innocent voices of the margins, right? Once it is becoming powerful in our ethics, in our things, we will call it as a vested interest, or an interest which needs to be which needs to be countered by another thing. That's why we have an articulated voices in the social movements or campaigns which exist in any of the global South, but we are not able to give them a legitimate space in a number of things, because anything collective, from trade unions to anything collective, is not a legitimate neoliberal platform. So these are some of the areas where we constantly struggle when we push it. However, to add to it, the counter thing, the challenge which we see in our participatory research is, which is also something which Francis would have experienced when he asked some of these questions, is something that we cannot assume that the community is always progressive. We cannot assume that the community is not patriarchal. You will see everything, racism, patriarchy, everything is casteism is very much inbuilt in the community with which we are trying to engage. And that's where some of the theories of Paulo Freire or Karl Marx or the people, or now Achilles brutalism. Some of these theorization which has happened are something very significant to actually define what is community participation. Community participation is not just capturing the innocent voices of the community and then mainstreaming it. That's where you see some of these Ambedkar's philosophies, etc. But unfortunately, those theories have been used, reused by many of the future later scholars, and they have been depoliticized. So a new human, what Franz and Fanon says, is somebody which is about a behavioral shift in human beings, attitudinal shift. It has been reduced to some of the very sanitized terms instead of calling it as a political sense. So therefore, I would say a lot of things resonate with our work, and the need is to say that it's not like continuum of decolonization is not a continuum. If you do 1, 2, 3, it is decolonization. It has to be space for theorization from margins is probably will actually give space for everything else. So unless we bring that into our vocabulary, it might be a difficult thing. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I'm aware there's a couple of comments in the chat, and then we also have Anna and Susan who've put their hands up. So I just wanted to give Daniel a chance. Daniel, you've put in the chat about the contextualization of ethics. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Pradeep and Tareen, for your wonderful presentation. Mine is just raising a concern. We tend to standardize ethics, and more so when you go to ethical review boards, you find they have just one mode that should fit all researchers, so long as they are dealing with human subjects, irrespective of the communities within which they are going to be executed. And yet I'm looking like the context I was in the African continent. We have close to 3,000 communities with lots and lots of different contexts and cultures, which define what is normatively acceptable within their case. And therefore now, if we are going to talk about decolonizing, then we also need to free up the aspect of standardizing definition of what is ethical, so that we leave room for what is also acceptable within the community context. And so that then again, we also respect the communities and what they have carried through their lived experiences for very many years. So that ultimately that would go into the core of now what I would call decolonizing, meaning once we leave some room. And that means also, even as practitioners, then we also need to redefine ourselves, so that again we also get away from the mold and we start also being as flexible as the communities that you're working with. That way then we can have a respectable and an empowering practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Tarini, Pradeep, would you like to make any more comments about that, or you agree with it? I'm sure. Yeah, very, very important point, Daniel. I am also looking in the chat to see Barbara's comments, and sure you've seen them, Tarini and Pradeep. She loved your diagrams and your presentation, and starts to talk about the Indigenous ways of knowing from Canada. Barbara, would you like to say a little bit about your comment and the questions?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much. The presentation today was great. I really enjoyed the global perspective here in Canada with the work that I do and the communities I work with, and our family, being an Indigenous family as well. It's been interesting to see the interest in equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigenization. What we are finding is that we are having to, as academics and researchers, adjust what we expect or how we present the research. So we've incorporated these aspects into our research ethics, but making space for the storytelling, making space for the lived experience, embracing more participatory action research, and living in that gray area so that research isn't, like the other members have said, so cookie cutter, so very restricted, and really embracing the way that we are learning as a researcher with how we are doing the research and how we're reporting on it. We had, protections in place to keep marginalized groups safe during the research process. But as we've pushed for decolonizing our research practice, it was also making space for the voices of our participants, our vulnerable communities, and our communities that have been taken advantage of to also have a say in the research, the process, and how it's reported. And it's been a real learning process because, of course, as academics, we think we're all right and we know it all already. So it has been trying to learn with the people in our communities that we're researching and learning from, and involving them more in telling the story and how it is reported, not just from a validation and a triangulation, but just really living the values. And it's something we're trying to incorporate in all of our research methods courses, our community-based research classes, so that all of our new researchers are taking this kind of piece with them as they grow as researchers. So it's just something that it's been quite new since about 2022. We've really built it into our research ethics and our research practice. It should have been there longer. Some people have been doing it longer, but it's become official, and it's now not just mandatory, but it's expected from the communities we work with as well, and they'll ask us about it. Yeah, it's been very positive. At least that's been my perspective. But I've really enjoyed the global aspect that you presented as well, and connecting it back to all of the traditional theories. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And if you've got any links that you want to put in the chat to some of your work, I think that could be very, very valuable for everybody. I'm now going to move on to Anna.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you, Pradeep and Tarini as well. I'm not sure really how to formulate what I have to say in some respects, or what I would like to say. I have several pages of just words, and trying to make that coherent to sort of make a contribution has been quite a challenge. I suppose my starting point really is I think it's been a hugely expansive presentation. And if I bring it back down to what I am about as a community development practitioner, then practice and values of participation and working with lived experience are central to that. That's kind of a core element of what community development is about. So absolutely believe in working in participatory ways, and the point at which people and their experiences are the basis of anything that's kind of grounding a process of work, whether that's research or action or whatever that might be. But as you, with your input and presentation, started to talk, my head was going in all kinds of directions, and the illustrations that you showed really kind of took me in various ways. But one term that came into my head, I think, with the chessboard element that you were talking about was, you made reference to the world and the context that we're living in, and where power lies, and the dominance of northern sphere particularly, and how that sets agendas. And I kind of thought about this term of regime change, which is circulating quite a bit at the minute. And certainly just from a news coverage point of view, the news that we see here is defined and determined by the global north, and particularly countries and states with very powerful regimes to direct and dictate what that looks like and sounds like as well. But your chessboard analogy requires us to look at things from a completely different perspective, and challenge the absolute foundations of what that is sitting on. And that then pulls in a whole range of other things for us to think about in the context of not just the communities that we live in, that we work alongside and that we're part of, but the institutional states that we live in that direct our lives as well. And the structures of those. And I was thinking then in terms of research about governance structures, risk, all of these things, these structures that are defined for us and, with which we have to comply. And yet they all lead us in a certain direction. And the chessboard analogy requires us to rethink all of that as well. The use of language. So I kind of felt like everything was being completely disaggregated. And what at times sometimes feels like a coherent environment that we work in, really, if we disaggregate all of that, is a mess. And how do we begin again? And yet that is, in many respects, perhaps what we need to do. So it's not a question because I couldn't reach the point of being able to frame a question. But it is a kind of a reflection or an observation on where your presentation and your input has taken my mind at this point in time. So thank you very much for that. I suppose my final point is that, and you actually touched on this, and so did one of our other contributors. For me, it is also very much about, in terms of lived experience and stories, the ability to work collegiately and collaboratively with people to bring those together in order to be able to collectivize that from a community development point of view. And I think we need, holding on to that is really, really important as well. But yeah, so thank you very much for quite a mind-blowing experience.
Thank you very much, Anna, for sharing that. And probably many others could share similar experiences in different ways. But I'm going to move on now to Susan, who's had her hand up for quite some time. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much for the very brilliant presentation. Quite mind blowing, I would say. Yeah, to hear about decolonization of research, decolonizing research. Yeah, so as you presented, I mean, this was really a new perspective, giving me a new perspective, given that in my work, actually I coordinate gender work across about 29 to 33 countries in Africa. So I've had the privilege of really interacting with so many, especially communities, and being part of even, maybe some work where we have had to collect information from the community. So as you presented, one thing that came out quite loudly to me is as you took us through were they like 5 points or processes? And one of them, the third one, which you were talking about, that this will be a painful process, decolonizing research would be a painful process because it is about taking power from the colonizer. So I looked at it from, I mean, I don't know whether you looked at the flip side of it, whereas, yes, it would be a painful process, taking away the power from whoever has been holding it so that it is as if we're handing it over to the people, the communities, maybe in the global south, for instance. I don't know whether you looked at the flip side of it, that it can also be equally a painful process for these other communities to be able to understand or even accept that this empowerment that we are trying to, I mean, you're trying to sort of give them, because there is one, I mean, it would take quite a long time for people to, for the communities especially, to get to understand that, they need to own this. They need that kind of ownership. Even when a research is being conducted, they actually need to come out and just like I think Francis is the one who mentioned, them having that kind of ownership or seeing then what is there for them. And one thing that I wanted to raise is the issue of, as we are giving them the voice, how do we then help the communities understand how this, how they are supposed to really position themselves so that their voice is not just to legitimize the findings. Yeah, so that whoever is conducting, for instance, a research, and you want to put in the voice of the communities so that it really legitimizes the work, but then being able to close the loop so that whatever it is that their contribution has been or whatever their voice has been, then how does it come back to then translate either to some positive impact or at least some change that they can also identify with. I think that is the bit that I'm kind of I'm left with, or I don't know what to say, to struggling with, so that at the end of the day, we are sort of, yes, we have conducted a research. Then how do we marry the theory and practice? Yeah, the people on the ground, we have the research here on one hand. So how do we close up this gap? Or how do we close the loop so that the research findings that we come up with, we are able to again communicate them in a language that the communities understand, that, well, out of the research that we did, then these are the results and this is how they impact you. And they are able to also pick it up and appreciate that we can be able to utilize this research in a way that is meaningful to us. Yeah, so instilling that confidence in the population or in the communities where we are conducting the research. Otherwise, I want to really appreciate this is a very, very good research, and I want to believe, it would really go far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Pradeep, Tarini, do you have any responses to Susan?
Yeah, not really in terms of anything into it. Completely agree with the thing. And as we look at like individual research and find out how it has been helpful, how it has been participatory, how we are trying to bring into it, we get a lot of nuances of it. And somewhere for some reason in the last 5-6 years, I've been focusing quite a lot on ethics, not because of ethics per se, but because of the fact that even this entire research as a thing can be governed under ethics. And somewhere I think I read the comment on the standardizing ethics part of it, that these are all how to nuance many practices which are happening between research and practice, that entire dialogue conversation, how they can also be brought under ethics. And somewhere standardizing it is has always been a challenge. Often we think that some people are standardizing it. It could also be ethics are getting standardized on a regular basis, and they are also changing. It's not like very static. It is also they are changing. So there is something which is happening, and that's where I think I heard from Sarah on the slow ethics part of it. It is the issue about the aspect of slow ethics, which is an ethics getting standardized through a very reflective process, through a continuous reflection. So anything slow is at least something where you have a space for discussions and all. If I take some examples on this, is somewhere even today of relationship between researcher and the which I have been often sharing. Even I think Sarah would be bored with it, which is like sharing with between the relationship between the researcher and respondent. Even today is about consent letter, right? And that consent letter is so much at every point of time. What we have seen, the consent letter is always lies with the researcher. It is rarely seen with the respondent to make the researcher or research accountable. It is only a researcher will make the respondent accountable. If tomorrow respondent says, I never said it or I never used it, you can show this is the consent letter. So literally it is the institutions, even the progressive consent letter at the end, I feel it is a very progressive thing, because you have to seek consent of the person. But consent is a minimal thing. It is not an end in itself, right? And the way the research has instrumentalized consent letter to make the respondents accountable to research rather than researchers accountable to the respondents is something which we need to see in the decolonizing lens. Like decolonizing also happens in that way. Many a time, it is like a lot of global North authors, even during the writing and even during the agreement, they write that the first author should be from global South, global North, and the global South will be co-authors. And later on in the negotiations, it is about, I have been very transparent from the beginning. So being a transparency is another virtue which is being used against a certain other thing. So there's a transparent negotiation. So being transparently unethical is also unethical in that sense. So that's how the way it has evolved. And often it is, researcher would say, it is not under my control. It is in the control of the institution I represent, and there is a grant maker. So you have a privilege in ourselves. We have so much of privilege that we can take from different things. So therefore, I would say the decolonizing would require us to look at the chessboard, the board part of it. Otherwise we will be playing within the board and trying to win the game. But it is the board which has to be challenged. Otherwise, you will probably get a very decolonized literature available in a very colonized way. That's the thing we have been struggling with. Yeah.
Thank you. I think a fitting point to end. I notice Kira's written some nice comments in the chat. Would you like to add anything verbally, Kira?
I'll just add my voice to say thank you to everyone here for all of their contributions. It's such a rich space, and I hope it's one topic we can build on in the Researchers Forum going forward. Thank you, Pradeep and Tarini. And I think your point about the chessboard, it's something we've also, in work I've been doing with Pavy Point here in Ireland, also been trying to tackle within the university in the institution around the ethics, approaches to ethics, the intellectual property rights, and the funder setting the research agenda. I believe you're fully right. Until we try to begin to transform some of these spaces, we're absolutely at risk of creating research and ideas that are continually colonized. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think it's fitting to end on that metaphor of the chessboard. You have some very, very useful metaphors, Pradeep, Tarini, your feeding tube as well. And I guess it's very scary to get rid of that hard, regulated chessboard and maybe realize that what we're on is a choppy sea, and it's quite hard to navigate and negotiate that sea and to accept that we are in rough waters, and that's the way of the world, and how we work with the ethics and everything else requires a lot of commitment and ingenuity, courage, and so on, which I think you have both demonstrated to us today and given us a lot of food for thought of things that we can be thinking of, both the small micro practices that we can adopt in our daily research, even within and on the chessboard, because we can't get rid of the chessboard overnight, but also in terms of what we can be doing in the bigger picture of challenging some of the institutional structures and the ways of doing research and being good researchers. So I think we've had a very, very good discussion, and lots of thanks are coming in the chat there. We haven't set a date for another meeting yet, have we, Anna and Kira? We usually have them about every 3 months or so. If anybody's got any ideas about themes or suggestions of speakers, we can have speakers on a topic like as we've had today. We can also have workshop-like discussions on a theme, or explorations of a particular methodology. So any issues that you'd like to work on, or even taking some of the issues raised today and looking at them in a bit more depth, would be another opportunity. So please do put any thoughts in the chat or contact us. You've got the email for IACD, I think, and that can be put in the chat for you anyway. And Jessica has offered to copy the chat if everybody's okay with that. If anybody is not okay with having the chat copied, do let us know and she can take out your contribution. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of useful links in there that people have been putting in, links to your work and work that you know of. So that would be very important for us to all share, along with the recording if you want to revisit. Pradeep, I think you and Tarini presented us with some very, very challenging questions and almost an invitation to rethink who we are and what we do, become different humans. And I think we here have given you quite a rough ride, or a challenging ride. You've been bombarded with a lot of questions as how do we achieve that difficult transformation that we're all looking for. And I think you've worked incredibly hard. So we've certainly got value from having you here with us, and I'm so pleased that you joined us. Would like to thank you wholeheartedly, and let's give a round of applause to Tarini and Pradeep for their excellent presentation. And we hope to see some of you again. So I'll invite you to leave. And Pradeep, Tarini, if you've got a few more minutes, if you'd like to stay on, we can do a quick debrief and a personal thank you from Anna, Kira, and I. So good luck, everybody, with your research projects. We hope to see you at the next meeting. Jessica will send around details when we decided when it will be and what it will be on.